Hi everyone, my name is Jade. I own and operate Calver & Associates Canadian Immigration Services. Today we're talking about eligibility for Canadian citizenship and applying for citizenship in Canada. So before you apply for Canadian citizenship, it's really important that you understand the 5 requirements in order to apply for Canadian citizenship. So the first is that you have to be a permanent resident of Canada. So this means you can't have any issues with your permanent residency status in Canada, and you need to have valid permanent residency status. Note, this doesn't mean you have to actually have a permanent resident card. You can still be a permanent resident without actually having your permanent residency card. So for example, if you came when you were young as a permanent resident with your parents and you've always lived in Canada, and you still retain permanent residency status, you can still apply for citizenship. The next is the time you've lived in Canada. So often people call it 3 out of 5 years, but I like to say it's 1,095 days. It's important to note that these have to be exact days, so you have to have an exact calculation of when you were here. And you can also count up to 1 year while you're a temporary resident towards that calculation. So every day that you're here as a temporary resident, so that's student, worker, visitor, temporary residence permit holder, those all count as a half day towards the citizenship requirement. So for example, if you lived for 1 year here as a worker prior to applying for citizenship, then that would count for a half year towards the day requirement. Take into account how close you are to the 1,095 day requirement. If you do that calculation and you're at 1,096 days or 1,097, it's just a little bit too close for comfort for me. I usually tell clients to wait a few months, make sure that they have well enough days. The reason for this being, if an officer ever determines that you're actually out of Canada for an extra, 3 or 4 days, that will actually make it such that you're not eligible for citizenship. So I always tell people to make sure they have a little bit of wiggle room with their days in Canada so that there aren't any issues with the residency requirement for citizenship. The next requirement is that you have to have filed your taxes in order to apply for citizenship. This is only if you have to. Again, I usually tell my clients to just keep filing their taxes and make sure those are up to date, because you need to in order to apply for citizenship. The next requirement is the English requirement. Again, it's only for those aged 18 to 54, so if you're getting close to the age of 55, then a lot of the times I say just wait another year if you can to apply for citizenship, so you don't have to worry about the language requirements or the test. A lot of the times people get confused as to what they have to provide as proof of language for citizenship applications. It's a little bit more lenient than it is if you've done an immigration application in the past. So if you've gone to secondary, so that's high school, or post-secondary in English for at least 1 year, you can use proof of that education in English as proof of your knowledge of English. So again, lots of our clients come from countries where their university was in English or their high school was in English. If you're not sure if it'll be accepted, the general rule is that the entirety of the instruction should be in English. If you think that an officer might have concerns about this, my trick is to include the degree or certificate along with a transcript. Again, if it's not in English, it can get a little bit trickier because you'll have to get it certified and translated. But again, usually the rule is that if it's issued in English, then it's okay because you've studied full-time in English. If for whatever reason you don't have this, maybe you didn't finish school, you can't get that certificate because your school closed, Then you can take a language test. You can take the IELTS or the CELPIP. You only need to take the listening and speaking, so you don't have to do the writing or reading portion of the test. And then you can get those results for the general test and submit it with your application instead of proof of education. The last requirement is sometimes the scariest part of citizenship eligibility for our clients, and that is the citizenship test. So again, if you're between the ages of 18 to 54, you'll have to sit a citizenship test for an application. It covers the rules and responsibilities of Canadian citizenship as well as some fairly standard Canadian history. All of the information comes from a book published by Immigration and Citizenship Canada, which if you're applying for citizenship, I suggest that you start preparing for well in advance of your citizenship test. The test is a 20-question multiple choice exam. You need to get 16 out of 20 in order to pass, minimum, and the test takes about 30 minutes to take. You get 2 chances at the test, and if not, then you have to go before a citizenship judge. So that's the last eligibility requirement for citizenship. I'd like to talk now about a few other tips for citizenship applications, things people sometimes forget or things that can cause hiccups with citizenship applications. One of those is the police certificate requirement if you're applying for citizenship. And you've lived in a country for 6 consecutive months or more in the last 5 years, then you'll have to provide a valid police certificate for that country. If you're applying and you lived for 6 months, say in England or Egypt or whatever, you should provide an original police clearance issued after you left that country with your citizenship application. Another pointer that I like to tell people is that they often look for proof of name change from birth until now. So if you changed your name because of marriage, I include a marriage certificate. If you changed your name when you were young, I like to see that proof of name change certificate from the issuing country, so either your home country or Canada, to show that you've legally changed your name. Another thing to think about are translated stamps. This is usually in cases where a person has extensive travel, and some countries will only issue stamps in the language of that country. A lot of the time I'll have those translated, and I'll include the certified translations with the application so that the officer can easily see where you went and how long you were there for. In terms of applying for citizenship, it's fairly standard. So you get the checklist, you provide all of the documentation. Again, you don't actually need a permanent residency card or a passport to apply, but you do need 2 pieces of ID. So if you don't have 2 pieces of ID in Canada, you'll have to include a passport. You cannot use your PR card as ID in the application. So you fill out the forms, provide all of the documentation, and you submit it to the processing office in Nova Scotia. And overall processing times take about 1 year from start until finish. You'll usually receive a request for fingerprints during processing. This is standard, so don't be alarmed if you receive a request for fingerprinting. After that is the notice of exam. You'll take the exam. And after that, usually around the 11th or 12th month, you'll receive a request to attend your citizenship ceremony, and at that ceremony you'll become a citizen of Canada and you'll receive your citizenship certificate. Thanks very much for watching. If you have any other questions, please visit our website at calvarimmigrationservices.com.